So, Alison Bechdel's Fun Home is one of my favorite books of all time. And I've been both looking forward to and sort of dreading um, putting together a mini lecture about it because I'm just not going to get everything that's there to get. You could spend a whole semester talking about this book. So I'm just going to budget what I think is a reasonable amount of time and open up the book and start pointing out stuff that I want you to notice. Um, but to give it a little bit of structure in advance, let me put a few ideas in your head at the outset. Number one, and this is a super obvious thing that anybody would notice who opens up this book to read it, that we are shown a number of incidents in the life of Alison Bechdel and other family members of hers. But we're not shown them in the order they happened. This book is arranged non-chronologically. So anytime that you notice this in a narrative, these are the two fundamental decisions that you can make about how you put your narrative incidents down on paper. You either put them exactly in the order they happened, let it unfold chronologically, or you don't, right? And anytime you notice an author that has put them in some non-chronological order, you should ask yourself, why did they do that? What is the effect of their doing that? What was their reason? Why did they think they would be better off doing it that way? And how did they guide the reader then to read it so that the reader can unscramble the chronology in their own mind and put it together, or close enough? Because if you can't do that, if you can't make a mental model of the timeline in your own head while you're reading, then you can't really fully understand the logic of the plot. If you can't even know what happened before other things that happened later, you can't figure out what is the cause and what is the effect, right? And going back to one of the earliest lessons that you heard from me in this semester, that's E.M. Forster's definition of what a plot even is, that you understand the logical connections, the causal connections between events. Okay. As everyone who's had me in class knows, I make a big deal out of what genre is this, because genre expectations, genre conventions, if something is presented as a memoir, then the reader has certain expectations about it. Okay. This book is almost perfectly poised in between what you might call a memoir or autobiography and a biography. It's in a way, it's the memoir of a relationship. And since her dad is dead and she's writing about him, almost as if this is her funeral tribute to her father in a way, but not a eulogy in a literal sense of saying nothing but good about the dead, because she says plenty of awful stuff about him. She's trying to put the actual man on the page, the good stuff and the bad stuff. Let's move on. I'll make these slides available to you. This book is so dense with literary allusion that this is why I say it would take an entire semester if you were determined to untangle and pin down every single one that she makes. I can't afford to do that, but I will point out a few on the fly as we go along, and I invite anybody who's interested to spend some time ferreting out some more for yourself. One thing that you can do, and I'll point this out some as we go along, is look closely at the books that the father, Bruce Bechdel, has in his hand. There's if you had to pick out one thing as maybe like a central mythological metaphor, the Icarus Daedalus myth. The guy who he and his son escaped from a prison by him constructing these artificial wings, right, that they would use to fly out. And he warns his little boy Icarus, well, teenage boy, I guess, don't fly too close to the sun. Icarus does, because he's reckless, because he's prideful, because he's a boy. And the wax in his wings melts and he falls to his death. His father survives and gets away, but Icarus does not. Okay. That myth is then filtered through the writer James Joyce, who refers to it in at least two of his novels when he names one of his main characters, Stephen Dedalus, right? There is also the myth of Sisyphus, condemned for I forget which sin, to perpetually roll a boulder up a hill that would fall down again, and he would have to do the same thing over and over and over again. That myth again is filtered through another later writer, Albert Camus, famously one of the French existentialist novelists of the 20th century. He has a book called The Myth of Sisyphus, which is basically a lengthy consideration of suicide from a philosophical point of view. Eventually, he gets to the point where he says, yeah, don't do it. But he has a good long think about it, a book length think, before he comes to that conclusion. All right. That's just a few examples of places where you could decide to dig in deeper, to give yourself let one book lead you on to another, right? You could read some Camus. You could read some James Joyce. You could read Anna Karenina. Or you could just read more of what other people have written about Fun Home. There are some people who still are missing an adventure assignment. This is a good place where you could dig in and choose an adventure from here. You can see that the title page for chapter 1 is based on a photograph of her father that she has. One of the interesting things about this book is the role that photographs play. And I suggested in the slides that another possible thing a person might choose to do for extra credit or a third adventure is to investigate Bechdel's process for how she composed this book, which involved her taking a lot of photographs of herself. The title is taken from James Joyce, Old Father, Old Artificer. That's the Daedalus connection again. Daedalus the artificer, the maker, the creative artist, as it were. In this intro to Bechdel, he makes the entire house that his whole family lives in into this gigantic art project for himself, right? The historical recreation. So in this chapter, we get our introduction to this man, and we learn, and these are my little shorthand notes for what happened in this chapter. What did Bechdel accomplish? Well, we learn certain things about him in this chapter, that he is a passionate home decorator. Also that he is what I've said is a domestic tyrant. Basically, he gets his way about everything that happens in that home. And he hits his kids. Not perhaps to the point where many or most people would call it abuse, but at least this is a thing that goes on in the house. We see it first on page 11. The cowering brother says, "Don't hit me." And again on page 18, he's got his hand raised to strike. Somebody put a vase in a dangerous position. And here on page 21, he's having a fit at the breakfast table, throwing something, which, as the one aspect of the narrator tells us, leaves a permanent scar. So, I mean, there are gradations, right? Would you call him an abuser? I don't know. Maybe I would. You know, I'm not a fan of hitting kids, but there are degrees. To throw a thing and smash it on the floor is not the same thing as to shatter somebody's face or skull with it, you know? Okay. Bechdel both opens and closes the chapter with shots of her and her father in a state of physical affection, right? This is fatherly love. This picture shows him doing a loving father sort of activity. And that's not the only time we see that either. It's here, it's the opening scene. And here, oops, I guess it's here we go, page 22, where he's bathing her, right toward the end of the chapter. So we've got the physical affection bookending chapter 1, front and finish, right? And here he is, you know, leaning over her in closeness and showing her how to drive the lawnmower. It's a shared project, right? There is physical closeness here. And then she ends the entire book with that same image. A reversal of the Icarus legend, right? In this one, it's the child who survives and the dad who perishes. And she's leaping down to him and he's going to catch her. That means something, that she puts that both at the front and at the back of the book. It's the starting image and it's the ending image, all right? So I don't want anybody to say there was no love there, because there was some. Maybe not the best kind or the right kind or the perfect kind, whatever. But Bechdel is making it clear that it wasn't all bad. Okay. We've got the Icarus theme very specifically evoked right there on page 1. And of course, in the title also. Icarus by way of James Joyce. In this first chapter, we mostly see a very young Allison. And although we do learn on page 17 about his homosexual indiscretions with underage males. Would an ideal husband and father have sex with teenage boys? Boom. So she's not saving that up for a surprise, right? We've been told it right there in chapter 1, but only by the grown-up narrator. The protagonist that we see in these pages, it's still a secret from her so far. So we're only seeing the quite young Allison. We're not seeing the older Allison. in this chapter. It's like a little quick look ahead to some information we're going to get later. So she's not relying on surprise to be the engine that drives the reader through this book. All right. Right here on page 1, well, I say page 1, I mean the opening page of the chapter, it's page 3, really. Bruce is reading Anna Karenina. Now think about this from the perspective of if you're going to write a memoir yourself. Do you think that narrator Alison Bechdel, author Alison Bechdel, really remembers precisely exactly what book Bechdel might have been reading at what point of her childhood? It's she's chosen characteristic books, but I don't assume that she remembers correctly that this was the exact book that he had on this day when they were playing Airplane. Anna Karenina. Spoiler alert. Anna Karenina is one of the top 2 most famous novels by Lev Tolstoy, the other one being War and Peace. As you can see from the Wikipedia article, the novel deals with themes of betrayal, faith, family, marriage, Imperial Russian society, desire, and the differences between rural and urban life. Also, many of them, at least, themes that Bechdel will be taking up. Spoiler alert, Anna Karenina runs away from her marriage with another guy, and basically that's it. She's burned her bridges. She will be socially ostracized from then on in the place where she came from. And she kills herself at the end of the book rather than face the mess that she's made out of her life. She kills herself by jumping in front of a train. Okay, the parallel is too obvious to need my underlining. An explanation that big is hidden inside of basically every titled book that Alison Bechdel, the author, places into Bruce Bechdel's hands. And you can dig this stuff out if you care to. On page 15 here, he's reading The Nude by Kenneth Clark with this male torso prominently featured on the front. Although this is prior to the time when the protagonist has any clue about her father's sexual orientation or her own. You know, he's not necessarily even completely covertly indulging himself. One more thing I'd like to point out in this chapter is this. Historical restoration wasn't his job. And here's him in the English classroom teaching 12th grade English, a class Bechdel will eventually take herself because it's the only one there is. You know, there isn't another 12th grade English teacher for her to take it from. Wasn't his job, it was his passion, and I mean passion in every sense of the word. And this is another Bechdelian trick to use words, deliberately use words that are ambiguous and have more than one meaning, and to make use of all of the meanings. Passion in every sense of the word, libidinal, manic, martyred. Libidinal means sex, passion, manic, the suggestion that, you know, there's something like seriously wrong with him, mental health wise, meaning manic like literally, not just figuratively, and murdered, as in the Passion of the Christ. And there he is, carrying this architectural element like Jesus bearing his own cross. It's worth noticing here on page 10, the reference to the It's a Wonderful Life, a movie many people are familiar with. It's often replayed on television at around Christmas time. And this is contrasted to her own home life, is this sort of idealized portrait of family life. I don't know if the real world contains families as marvelous as this one, or like the Brady Bunch type family. But maybe it does. I don't know. Mine wasn't that great either. It's enough for Allison to see and long for this sort of like imagined better situation for family life, right? Okay. In chapter 2, the title A Happy Death, and that title is borrowed from the author Camus, the same dude who wrote The Myth of Sisyphus. A Happy Death is his first novel. I'm not sure if it was ever published. It was like an early version of The Stranger. If you have been assigned one Camus novel in an English class, it may have been The Stranger. Anyway, this chapter delves into Bruce's suicide, or anyway, Bechdel is showing it to us as a suicide, thinks of it as a suicide. Although her very first line in chapter 2 is, "There's no proof actually that my father killed himself." So it's open to interpretation. And the title page picture in this case is his monument in the cemetery, which is sort of unusually an obelisk. Kind of obvious phallic symbol. And her father is a collector of obelisks. Let's see. Notice how Bechdel redraws the newspaper. There's this kind of collage effect. She'll often take a photograph and redraw it, right? I don't think we're supposed to interpret this as a photograph. This is just, that's what it looks like. If you're, oh, wait, yes, it is. There's the little, paste this into the photo album. Okay. She'll redraw a magazine, or a newspaper, or a book, or a photograph, or a map at various places in this book. And chunks of the dictionary. This is hand drawn. You can tell because of its slight irregularity, but she's mimicking typeface with her own hand-drawn font here. Same thing for the memo. I mean, she probably really did get this memo, and maybe she even still owns the exact thing, but then she's reproducing it by hand drawing it. Okay. Page 30 is an example where she's hand drawing part of a map, and page 57, the dictionary. It it adds to the reality effect of this entire book-length comic, but also it speaks to her obsessiveness to some extent. I'd like to point out on page 31, my urbane father, with his unwholesome interest in the decorative arts, remained in this provincial hamlet. She's choosing these highfalutin words on purpose. Like, why didn't her parents live in a city? They would have been, with the tastes they had, they would have been more comfortable in a city, right? But they didn't. They stayed in this teeny tiny little town with its small town values. Okay. And my cultured mother, who had studied acting in New York City, would live there cheek by jowl with his family, is more puzzling still. Okay. It was made clear that my brothers and I would not repeat their mistake. The mom says, don't you kids get any ideas about dragging a trailer into the backyard? After you graduate from high school, I don't want to see you again. There's more than one way to interpret this. And I've had students in the past say that this mother is cold, or this mother is not a good mother, or whatever. But I interpret this as an expression of love. She wants her kids to have a better life, an opener, freer life, a life with greater cultural prospects than the one she settled for. And she's putting this in a kind of a humorously scolding tone. At least that's the way I'm reading it, right? I can picture my mother saying something like this. You know, it was always understood when I was a child. It was like always understood that, of course, I would go away somewhere to college. Of course, I would have some career that would take me to a place other than where my family lived. And for people who grew up in the Rio Grande Valley and are not planning to leave the Rio Grande Valley, this might seem like strange that that parents could have the desire that their kids live on the other side of the country for them. But it's a real thing that really does happen. If you have that kind of intellectual or artistic ambition, that kind of aspiration, like, your aspirations cannot be achieved here. You must go away from us. So chapter 2 gives us an account of the father's funeral. And also a little bit more background about what it was like to grow up with a family that has a funeral home business, as well as a flashback to what Allison and her brothers always saw as her father's earliest brush with death when he was just a little boy, getting stuck in the mud in a field. What if the mailman didn't see him? Would he have died? And this chapter also gives the account of how her parents were in Europe, and then sort of by chance or by accident, they were drawn back to the small town that Bruce grew up in, and trapped there. And this is treated almost as that's like a death in itself, the death of their European cultural aspirations, or anyway, something tragic. Stuck in the mud for good this time. In chapter 3, That Old Catastrophe, the main allusion here is to a poem by Wallace Stevens. I have put up a link to that poem on our website. And anybody who would like to follow up that link and try to understand all of the references in that poem that Bechdel is making use of, I invite you to do that for extra credit or even for your Adventure 3. That Old Catastrophe, from Sunday Morning by Wallace Stevens. In this chapter, the main character, Allison, goes off to college and comes to recognize herself as a lesbian. So she comes out like first to herself and then to her parents, and then immediately thereafter she gets a girlfriend, and then like almost immediately and not coincidentally, her mom drops on 19-year-old Allison the bombshell news that her father has had affairs with other men. Page 57. That's where she reproduces a chunk of the dictionary where it defines the word queer, covering everything except the sense in which that word is most frequently used today. This is the truck that kills her father. I had meant to point out back on page 17, there's a little foreshadowing note. I guess not page 17. It's where he throws the thing at breakfast. Yeah, page 21. Little bit of foreshadowing there. There's a loaf of sunbeam bread right there on their counter. One reason that Bechdel must have had for telling the story non-chronologically is this kind of feeling of recurring, and we go back over the same thing. It's like music almost. It's like a musical motif. We hear certain themes in the very opening chapter. The father's obsessiveness, the father's household tyranny, and then the fact too that love was not absent, which we see right at the beginning and then right at the end. She wants this recurring motif, and one way to make that happen is just to make it happen, to make the events unfold as they suit her themes rather than as they suit the understanding of what happened in what order. She can at any moment go back over again. Here on page 58, that's where the bombshell is first dropped on young Allison. Your father has had affairs with other men. We learned about that way back in the first chapter, but she, protagonist Allison, didn't learn about it until now. Her mom thought she might have already known. This comes a little out of order, right? 4 months earlier, I had made an announcement to my parents. I am a lesbian. She puts it in a letter, mails off the letter. Well, part of the aftermath of that letter, her mother writes a letter back to her, kind of hinting around and saying, you know, homosexuality has had a real bad effect on my life. You know what I'm talking about? Allison is like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about, Mom. And so she's like, all right, I'll spell it out then. Your father has had affairs with other men. What? And here she is, like reacting to that emotionally, curled up in the fetal position on her dorm room floor, here on page 59. We return to this moment repeatedly also. We see the same thing again on page 79. Here she is, curled up on the bedroom floor. Dad, with other men? Roy, our babysitter? And we have seen Roy before in passing, but after this point, we see him again in more detail and interacting with the kids in the family also. Interesting note. This is the same scene, the same instant. You can tell, not just because of her position, but because of the stuff that she has around her, what her current reading matter is. And yet, it's not just Bechdel digitally reproducing what she already drew. These are two different drawings. She drew it and she redrew it. You can tell if you look at the details of the hatching in her pants. That obsessiveness. Okay. What else did I want to say about the old catastrophe chapter? Her exciting reading matter. It starts in the bookstore. She's looking at books in a bookstore, and one of them trips something in her mind, like, "Oh, that's me. I am that. I am a homosexual." And then she goes to the library. I found a 4-foot trove in the stacks, which I quickly ravished. That verb ravish applied to books. I really love that. Ravishing a 4-foot section of shelf. This is the response letter her mother writes from Allison writing her coming out letter. As disapproval goes, I suppose it was rather mild. Still, I was devastated. And her mom tells her in a PS to destroy the letter. Obviously, she did not obey. Obviously, she still has the letter, which she redraws here. I'm just going to fast forward real quick to page 94, which flashes back. We already know now that her dad had an affair with this man, but she doesn't know it at this point. We're flashing back to younger Allison, as you can tell by the size of her and by the hairstyle. Here's Roy, her father's secret lover, doing household handyman stuff around the house and also babysitting the kids. And look at him romping and roughhousing with the kids. Imagine what it would feel like to have your world like turned upside down, to have to completely revise your memories of what role this person had played in your family. And that's one of the benefits that Bechdel is getting by telling it out of order, that it emphasizes to us. Like if she had just done everything in order, we would have had to see these scenes before we knew. And now we see it with the full knowledge in mind, right? That in some ways duplicates her experience better than if Bechdel had told it in order. Let's see. On page 80 and 81, we see semi-graphically I'd say this is R-rated material. We see her first sexual relationship unfolding with Joan at college. And it's juxtaposed to their reading matter, and you know, they're re-looking at their childhood books. And meanwhile, back in Beech Creek, things are going from bad to worse in her father's relationship with her mother. Okay. It has already been dropped upon us on page 59 about her dad. But the mystery for her extends longer than that, and she shows us in these flashback pages, like this is the short version of her mom telling her about her dad, and now here's a version that goes on for several pages, stretching out for a couple of weeks, as it did for her, as the letters went back and forth, and she was in a state of like not knowing what her mom was talking about until the next phone call comes. And meanwhile, her own relationship with Joan is starting up. And so the decline of her parents' marriage into absolute ruin, and the strong beginning of her own relationship with Joan are juxtaposed on these two pages. The juxtaposition and the parallels. Her life is on the rise, her love life is on the rise, and her dad's is in steep decline, if not free fall, at this point. Soon after Joan and I had moved in, I got Mom's call about the divorce. I've had it. He threw the Brinley down the stairs. You know how much he loves that painting. And 2 weeks after that, the call about the accident. Is he dead? Yes. Okay. Uh, 82 and 83, there's some explanation about the Wallace Stevens book, in which the poem Sunday Morning, which the mom singles out as being her favorite poem. I have already put up a couple of links on our website for you to follow up on this if you're interested in digging out that particular piece of extra credit. So I won't say anything more about it here. The final image in this chapter is quite poignant. With the juxtaposition between her life and her father's life has been established already on page 80 and 81. And now here it is again, but in flashback. She's making herself to be like a tween or maybe a very young teenager, somewhere between age 11 and age 13, I'm guessing. And he's writing out the checks so she can buy some Mad magazine, or so some books. She says Mad books, but I don't know if Mad magazine is still a thing that people know about. But for people my age, I'm about the same age as Alison Bechdel. A lot of my early cultural education came from Mad magazine, and I think it was probably the same from Alison Bechdel too. Some new Mad books, they cost $3.70. Write it out and I'll sign it. Okay, and there they are in his library, and she's writing the check for him to sign. And they're separated but also together and sort of compartmentalized in this way, but still parallel with each other. I'm reluctant to let go of that last tenuous bond. Anytime you write a memoir, you're always, in a sense, dealing with more than one person. You know, there's the you are now, the mature narrator of the entire story who has an omniscient like overview of the whole of the story. And there's the you were then, you know, the protagonist that was stuck in that moment and only knew the things she knew at that point. In Bechdel's memoir, very frequently, the written captions, whether it's inside of or outside of the panel itself, that's the older woman's voice speaking, and then the younger child is the person who is drawn inside the panel, right? People who do memoirs that don't involve pictures, they have to do something similar between braiding the mature voice and the younger, more naive, stuck in that time period experience. But there's still ways to do it, even if you're not using pictures, but it becomes very clear when the pictures are there to sort of supplement the fact that there's these two different perspectives being juxtaposed and or blended sometimes. And here on this page, here we're there with Allison in the scene, you know, and this is what it's like to be her, and she has no idea what's coming, and her dad is the person who provides her the money she needs to get her Mad magazines to continue her education in cartooning, right? Mad magazine is also an early example of some fairly sophisticated stuff going on in the comics genre. Okay. And then we move from being inside of the room to like having this view from outside of the room. And it's a shift in narrative perspective from the camera being here to it pulling back to here. And that's what it's like to inhabit a memory. You know, you're in it and then you're withdrawing, seeing it from the inside versus seeing it from the outside. Very beautiful. Chapter 3. Sorry, chapter 4. Shadow of Young Girls in Flower, that's a Proust allusion. One of my favorite authors of all time, Marcel Proust. I'm going to point out a couple of small things in this chapter. Her father's love of flowers is a big deal, and this is compared to descriptions of lilacs in Proust. And incidentally, I'm not getting all Freudian here, but a flower is literally a plant's sex organs, right? That's what a flower is. That's where plants mingle their gametes, just the way mammals do it with their genitalia. So you can't fully separate the idea of a flower from the idea of sex. That's why we talk about the birds and the bees. Page we've talked about that already. Page 98. Marcel Proust goes back to the turn of the 20th century, approximately. At that time, homosexuality was not called homosexuality, or at least not as widely as it is now. The term of art then was inversion. Okay, and Bechdel knows that. You might not have, but she does, and she points that out on page 98. Not only were we inverts, we were inversions of one another. So playing with that idea. And even maybe the word homosexual is a little out of date now. The language is always a moving target. Anyway, she's playing with the idea of inversion and meaning it in more than one sense. In the sense of queer, and also in the sense of the like physical meaning of turning upside down. Here, look how their two speech balloons cross over each other. And she is yearning to have a masculine self-presentation, and per her supposition anyway, he is yearning to have a feminine self-presentation, but because it's not allowed for a man to be as femme as he wants to be in provincial Beach Creek, he's trying to make her be as girly as he secretly wants to be. I was trying to compensate for something unmanly in him. He was attempting to express something feminine through me. Well, that's her theory, anyway, about her father. Velvet. His suit is velvet, and the mom sardonically says, "You're going to upstage the bride in that suit." And she has exercised her limited power to choose to pick the least girly dress in the store. She wasn't allowed to not wear a dress at all, but she could at least pick the sailor suit kind of dress. While we're on this page, this is a masterful, like, visual composition. You know, the way it's balanced and the way all the parts come together. But just while we're here, let me point out the different devices that she's using. There's the pictures, of course, and then there's her and her dad reflected in the mirror. You might remember when we talked about Chris Ware's mirror picture earlier, right? The two of them are mirroring each other. And then there's the way the words are deployed. And there's 3 different ways that words are used here. There's the dialogue, of course, the stuff that's in the speech balloon. And these are per the conventions of narrative. These are words that were actually spoken by the characters who were inhabiting this moment. The same as if you use double quotation marks in purely prose literature. And then the words that are up here on top of the panel, and also the words inside this little box, which is either called a caption or a narration box. All of that is the narrator explaining stuff to us, you know, telling us the story. There's dialogue in the story and there's narration in the story. And then there's this other thing. This is not exactly a caption. I'm going to call this a label. The label, least girly dress in the store, and the label, velvet. If you were to try to find an exact equivalent in prose writing only, you might say it's something like a footnote. It's like I'm going to supply you a little additional information that you need to have, dear reader, but it doesn't really fit in the narration, nor is it dialogue. Bechdel makes really good use of this labeling technique. It might, another thing that you might compare it to in purely prose writing is parentheses. So authors who need to do this kind of stuff might end up using a lot of parentheses. Proust has a lot of parentheses. Okay, I need to pick up the pace here and turn more pages more quickly. Here's the visit to New York on page 103. She lets you know that this is 1969 by pinning it to the Stonewall riots. So it had only been a few weeks since the Stonewall riots, I realize now. That makes this 1969, that makes the character here about 10, or maybe 9 or 10. There are some clever little details that Bechdel puts in. Lilac chocolates. This is probably just her own invention, right? But that's the reference back to Proust's lilacs again, and her father's lilac loaf. Here's another little label. This one goes across 2 panels, and it's not just a verbal label this time, but there's also like there's this X-ray view of her budding breasts, right? Remember the chapter title, Within a Budding Grove? Budding, budding, budding. Budding is the only possible word to describe the painful, itchy beginnings of my breasts at 12. It's true I had not wanted to grow breasts, but it never occurred to me that they would hurt, nor had I expected them to be so oddly cartilaginous. Accidental impact was excruciating. Oh my God. That is so real and so accurate. I never have I seen a better description of what it feels like to be a fairly butch 12-year-old sprouting her breasts. I'm going to say one more word about Marcel Proust. One of my favorite authors of all time. A guy I was trying to date one time asked me what it was I found so compelling and enjoyable about reading Proust. He picked up the book and looked at it, and it seemed to him like it was about nothing, you know? The guy goes on and on and on for pages of description. And when I said, it's about what it feels like to be alive, you know, and a lot of authors don't even attempt to get at that. But Proust is one who does, and so is Alison Bechdel, and that is what I love about reading this. One of the things I love most. I also put Chris Ware in that same category of Proustian detail of what it feels like to be a live person. This is a bit younger again, as you can tell from the hairstyle on page 111. What is this? It's a girly calendar. Don't open it, it's dirty. I'll be right back. It looked clean enough to me. Little Bechdelian humor. This is, you know, prior to her budding and sexual quickening. Dirty, clean. She's not thinking about sex at this point. Oh. In the same trip, the same car trip, here's her brothers clowning around in the car on the way home. And see what? I guess this is her older brother. I mean, sorry, the older of her 2 younger brothers. Pulling his shirt away from his own nipples as though he had breasts under there. It's a little bit of mockery of femininity which is quite common among males of various ages. But he's doing that in the car, pretending like, oh, look at me, I'm a girl. Look at this ridiculous face I'm making, and look at me ridiculously making these breasts for myself on my chest. No wonder she's not happy. And then her dad and his latest mentee, shall I say, protege. That's the word I wanted. Okay. Chapter 5, I guess we're up to. I hate to skip over this scene, but I am going to skip over this scene. Y'all don't need my help to read that. Okay, chapter 5, the canary-colored caravan of death. The canary-colored caravan is an allusion to the wind in the willows. But the caravan of death is an allusion to the news headlines of the time. Chile. Look it up if you care to. Get yourself some extra credit. Anyway. This is very characteristic, very revealing scene. Young Allison, how old is she here? 6, maybe? Dad had read me bits of the story from the real book. So maybe she's not even a good enough reader yet to read for herself. Her parents are still reading to her, and she's coloring. What are you doing? That's the canary-colored caravan. 6-year-old girl coloring in her coloring book, and her dad interrupts her because she's not coloring right. Oh my God. Nothing says obsession. Nothing says hypercritical more than this scene. And Bechdel, the author, knows it. She knows she's exposing something deeply unattractive in her father. You can't color that in blue. It's the canary-colored caravan. Here, I'll do the rest in yellow, and we'll fix it by making your blue side be the shadow. And look, by adding thin layers of goldenrod and yellow orange, I get a richer color. Great, dude, you proved that a grown man can color better than a 6-year-old girl. And grown-up narrator Allison calls this a crayonic tour de force. The little girl is just sort of devastated and humiliated. I'm like, how can I ever color as good as this man can color? And she pretty much gives up coloring from then on. You know, I never wrote another poem, and soon I abandoned color too. Instead, she grew herself in a different direction from the direction her father took with his color obsessions. But crayonic tour de force is quite ironic. Like him insisting that, you know, this perfect aesthetic taste of his has to be respected, even when it comes to kids' coloring books and kids' crayons. Ridiculous. Everybody in the family had hobbies and or talents that they were passionate about pursuing. Here on page 133, their rapt immersion evokes a familiar resentment in me. I'm hungry. I'll make lunch in 15 minutes. It's childish, perhaps, to grudge them the sustenance of their creative solitude. I've had students read this book and just denounce these parents as terrible parents, unloving parents, and the mom in particular, I'm hungry, I'll make lunch in 15 minutes. I take a different view. I think mothers are also people who deserve to have the chance to develop their talents and skills and not think that their life has to be fully devoted and that the children must always come first every second, Wait 15 minutes for lunch doesn't seem that bad to me. From their example, I learned quickly to feed myself. It was a vicious circle, though. The more gratification we found in our own geniuses, the more isolated we grew. Our home was like an artist's colony. We ate together, but otherwise were absorbed in our separate pursuits. Well, is this a tragedy? I mean, artist colonies produce great art. I think it's very finely balanced, whether we're supposed to deplore this household or celebrate it. I think that you really can go either way. I will leave it as an exercise for the reader to winkle out all of the various snake references. Bechdel is overt about describing it as a phallic symbol, but also a feminine symbol. Somewhere where the snake comes up, and there's also an allusion to it in her father's reading matter. Extra credit for anybody who wants to write that up. On page 146 and 147, there's a massive traffic accident in which one of Allison's relatives is killed. Distant relation, cousin or second cousin, distant cousin, a boy exactly my age. It must have been quite shocking, though, to have somebody who and has the same last name as you. Maybe there's loads of Bechdels around, and they have them killed in traffic. There's obviously parallels between the way her father's life is going to end. This chapter both opens and closes with a sunset, which ever since the dawn of literature, sunsets have been a stand-in for death. The beginning of our life is like a sunrise and the end of our life is like a sunset. And so sunset in the very first panel and sunset here in the very last panel, and the infinite gradations of color in a fine sunset, from salmon to canary, midnight blue. I'm going to point out one more thing to bolster my argument that in terms of this book being a depiction of a relationship, that it is not all tragic or all bad. When Allison is old enough to be in 10th grade English, and she has to take her dad's class because it's the only 10th grade English in town, they come closer to each other. Through their shared interest in literature and ability at literary appreciation. Sometimes it was as if Dad and I were the only ones in the room. What about Lizzie and her father? Varner? They're reading Pride and Prejudice. They have this neat relationship. They're like friends. The sensation of intimacy was novel. Novel. Get it? And then here they are in the class, in their family car. And look, she's the driver. You're the only one in that class worth teaching. It's the only class I have worth taking. All right. Don't tell me there was no love in that family. There was some. And last thing I'm going to point out is here. This is the one and only place. And she saved it till the end, really. She warmed us up for it a good long time before we got here. Before this goes into territory that's probably not even R-rated. You couldn't show this scene in a movie and have it get an R rating, for instance. This is, I personally would not call this pornographic. It's just like, this is what happened. This is what I did. This is how it was. And we don't actually see Joan's vulva, just some pubic hair, and then Allison putting her mouth right there. If this was a movie and this scene was in it, it would have to be X-rated. But I think Allison has been quite restrained. She, in previous scenes, she does tricks with the placement of other objects, and it's not how do I want to say this? These scenes are not designed to titillate or arouse. It's explicit, yes, but not pornographic. My humble opinion. I have had students differ with me over the years. All right, I'm done. I've said everything I want to say about this book for now, but I urge anybody who's interested to take it further. We can have an individual discussion group with people who want to make this your adventure number 3.